Okay, cool. So we are going to be going over reviewing HTML, basically HTML and CSS, because those are crucial to being able to manipulate the front end portion of an application. And my computer is acting up like crazy. What is that? Why is that? Okay. And we will then review DOM tomorrow, and that should get us ready for covering React. With all those lessons covered, we'll be able to segue into building out a full stack application, which we will deploy to AWS. So today, and this is running really slow. Okay. Trying to pull up today's README. Okay, and I don't know why it's being so slow. Okay, where did that go? I'm not sure what's going on here. You guys can at least see the browser, right? Even though it's not showing anything.
Yes, sir.
What is wrong with this? Okay, well, if you have your browsers pulled up, just pull up today's lesson. So we're on week 5. If you go to day 1, you should see a link to today's READMEs, which will include a lesson on HTML and CSS, and then a lesson on HTTPS servers and clients. These are largely topics that we've covered before. You'll see, for example, that we've covered curl and API requests. As for HTML and CSS, it's basically a lot of documentation on the various elements of HTML that you can use when building out HTML. So your various tags, right? Like P for paragraph, div for divider, etc. Same with the CSS portion. It's just a lot of sort of boilerplate CSS syntax. So instead of running through that in a slide deck, which I think will be extremely monotonous and bland, I'm just gonna demo building out some stuff related to today's assignments, the personalized to-do list from VS Code. You can reference the READMEs today to look through the various HTML tags that you can use to build out a page. Same for the CSS. But for today's lesson, let's pull up VS Code. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a basic to-do list, right? It's going to be a to-do list that has an about me page. So we're going to use some very basic HTML pages like an index and let's see. So I have an index.html, and I'm also going to want to create an about me page. So I'm going to do code about.html. Now, I'm going to leave that blank, and I'm going to go back to my HTML file. I personally don't think it's super crucial to memorize all of these HTML tags, especially if we have really handy things, right? Like VS Code to give us boilerplates for things like HTML. If I were to type HTML:5, I've got some boilerplate ready to go. I could change a few things like the title of my page, which is going to be my to-do list. And from here, I can start editing. Let's do a very simple paragraph where we say, hello world. Let's actually make that a header. If you aren't aware, headers are by default rendered in larger sizes and boldness weights compared to your standard paragraph. So if I were to type H1, that will make a good size text for my header, my title, which for now is just going to be hello world. And one thing to know about HTML is these tags will always require an opening and an ending. And the syntax for that is basically having your left and right carets with the name of the tag. And then you repeat that with a forward slash at the start of the closing tag. So if I want to see what this looks like, one thing I could do is I could go to the directory that my index.html is in, and this is this directory right here. And I'm going to do a Python -m HTTP server, I believe. Whoops. What is it? Dot server. So HTTP dot server. And now this has opened up a page. Oh man, but my browser still isn't working. Let's see. It's weird. It's working on my other screen, but nope, actually, I just opened a new tab and now it's acting up. Why is it doing this? Maybe I have too much stuff open. Okay, let's see if this will drag over. Okay, it is being really slow. Kind of see that I have hello world. Oh man. Okay, give me one sec. Let me try to close some stuff out because this is unbearable. Um, why the I think I have way too many browsers open. Let me clutter. Bear with me here for just a few more moments. Okay. Hopefully this is much better. So far, it doesn't seem like it is. What is eating up my memory? I'm going to also close out, let's see, I'm going to close out Docker. I'm going to get rid of that. Even after closing out all these browsers, it's crapping up. All right, for those of you that are running this locally, let me know if you're able to see your page using Python -m HTTP server. Should I try? It's not responding. Yeah, let me try closing out Chrome and reopening it because this is really bad. Okay. It's looking a little better. All right. So seems to be working a little better. So we've got a basic hello world page. And the next thing I want to do is let's see if we go back to our README. We have to make a to-do list. So we got to make a list of things to do. We also want to be able to work with some third-party APIs, right? So go to our to-do list. We will be using the index, about, and style.css to build a very basic page. And then we will be doing a to-do list. So let's start with our to-do list. Let's not worry about that just yet. I'm going to start by creating another header. This time it's going to be an H2. And then just going to say something like to-do list or my to-do list. And in this header, I'm going to use an input. If we go over to our README, should be able to see something about an input in our list of HTML tags. So input, it is used for various types of input fields like text, passwords, reader buttons, and checkboxes, etc. So if I wanted to be able to write various entries for my to-do list, input is the element that I would want to use. We will need to pass in a type. And in this case, we just want a simple text input. Let's give it an ID. Let's call it something like input item, and we'll put a placeholder. This is what's going to show when nothing has been entered by the user. So let's say something like enter item. So I've opened my input. I can now close it. And in between the opening and the closing, I could add some additional elements like a button. This button will be we'll do an on click. What we're going to do is this on click will trigger a JavaScript function, which we are going to be able to write using a script. So before we actually add that, let's go ahead and say something like add button or add item to our button. And next thing we want to add is a divider. This divider is going to be what we use to contain our list. And inside this divider, we have to use UL, which is, I believe, let's see, what does UL stand for? I forget. Unordered list, right? So unordered lists are defined using UL, and list items are marked with LI. So UL is going to be here. We open it, and we say, give it an ID like item list. And then we're going to close it. Now our script is going to be what creates the individual entries in our list. So we actually need to close this input. I feel like I don't. Let me get rid of this for now because I don't think I need this. So I'm gonna get rid of that. And now I'm gonna write my script. And my script is going to allow me to use some JavaScript magic. So the first thing I'm going to do is write a function called create list item. So as you can see, we're now able to write in some JavaScript syntax. And I'm going to write var input value. So this is creating a value attached to the keyword input value, or the variable keyword. And we are going to say document get element by ID. We'll go over this in more depth tomorrow, but document refers to the HTML file. And when we cover the document object model, we'll see how the DOM reads the HTML that is being passed in to render the HTML elements in a tree-like hierarchy. So for now, we are just gonna think about the document as being the HTML file and there being available methods like get element by ID. As you saw earlier, we were adding IDs to these various HTML elements, and that's how we are going to access this list. So we said for our input, an ID of input item. So that's what I want to grab right now, input item. And by targeting that element, I'll be able to pass in, or sorry, I should be able to read the value that is passed in by the user. So with the value, I can now write some additional logic. So if the value dot trim is not equal to a blank value, then we should be able to do the following. We're going to create a list item because as we saw in our documentation, li is what the element we use for list items. So we're going to say document.create element. This is another built-in method available to the document class, which allows us to add additional elements as opposed to writing them manually here. So these elements are being created dynamically using JavaScript. So the element we want is basically going to be a list item. We're going to say for this list item, we want a text content, and it's going to equal the value of the input that we grabbed from the input element up here. Everyone tracking so far? Cool. So once we do that, we could then target another document element. So now we're going to say document.getElement by ID again, but this time we're going to grab the item list. And with this list, we're going to be able to append a new child list item. And up here in line 24, we assign that new element to the variable li. So that's what we're passing in. Let's run another document.getElement by ID. This time we are going to grab the input item, and we are going to reset that value to a blank value. So once a user has typed in a value for the input and we've recorded it as an entry in the list, we want to be able to clear the field so the user can add a new value. And now let's see, we've closed the script. Let's see if this works. Clear all that out. I'm going to run my Python -m HTTP server, and I'm going to go back to my page and I'm going to refresh. And now we see we've got the my to-do list. We've got a field and we've got a button. Let's look at what this looks like inside of our inspector. So opening up my dev console, I can click on this handy little button, which allows me to highlight elements inside of my page. We can see the H1 that we created for Hello World, the H2 for my to-do list, and the input, which we see has an ID of input item and the button that we created as well. So if I were to add let's say create a to-do list. That's the first thing to do on my to-do list. Oh no, nothing is happening. So let's see, what are we missing? We have an if statement here. Are we missing? Oh, we might be missing some styling. Let's add some styling actually. So I'm gonna go back to my header, and I'm gonna underneath the title add a new style block. And I'm gonna say for my list container, this is some CSS now. We are going to want let's say a margin of 20 pixels. We're also going to want for the individual list items let's do another margin. We'll do margin bottom, and then a delete. Well, no, we'll do that later. Let's see, let's save, let's refresh. Still nothing. So we have our list container, our unordered list. Inside of our unordered list, we have, let me actually take a look in my inspector and see if I click on this. I see we have the list container. We have the unordered list, item list, but it doesn't seem like anything is being created when we hit this button. So my button on click, oh, I'm not calling my script, of course. So I created a function, but I'm not actually calling it. So I got to go back to my on click, which I left blank earlier, but forgot to go back to. And I am now going to pass in the function that I created. So let's refresh. Let's now add a new entry. And we see that it's still not adding anything. But let's see why. So we have list item, script, item. We have for this function, if set an input value by targeting the input item is the ID here. Okay, so far so good. Are all of my tags correct? Item lists. Oh, as you can see, I did not grab the item list correctly. I called it item dash list up here, but I'm saying item capital L list down here. So let's correct that. We have to be able to target the correct element in order to append a child to it. So let's refresh one more time and let's try this again. Create a to-do list. You would think their time is a charm, but apparently not. So let's expand that. We see that we have the item dash list. We are supposedly targeting that now and appending the list item. Let's see. Does anything else look obviously wrong? Item dash list, input item. This, let's, okay, so there's the item list. It's now item dash list. What else? Am I missing anything?
So Julius, it says the placeholder is enter item, but then the placeholder over there is create a to-do list. I'm probably wrong, but on line 22 it says your placeholder is enter item, but then on the page it says create a to-do list.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, let's do this. Where does it even say that in? Okay, hold on, let me see. Am I in the right? HTML, index.html. That's really weird. Does it say that? Oh, no, well, no, now it says enter item. What the hell? Just refresh.
Okay, maybe you just had something in, maybe you typed something in there and that was what you actually had in there. That's what
Oh,
I figured.
right.
Sorry about that.
That was. Oh, but let's refresh again. I think I just noticed if I try to add an item, I do have an error. So we could go into our console and we could see cannot read properties of undefined reading value. So that is our clue. And if we look at line 31 of our create list item, so we're saying input value equals document dot get element by ID input item dot value. So our input item dot value, we are not able to read this for some reason. And
Brackets and parentheses don't matter here, do they?
well, we do need brackets in this case because oh, no, you're right. We don't want brackets in this case. We want parentheses. Thank you.
Nice. Troy for the win.
Right on. All right. After a lot of fumbling through this HTML, we've finally been able to create an unordered list. So now what if we want to be able to delete items from this list, right? We now want to add some additional functionality to this create list item method. Let's say we'll create a delete button that we're going to attach to each of these entries, and we're going to create an element called span. Span, like div, is a container, but the difference is span is used to inline items horizontally. So what that means is the idea is we will have a delete button in the same line as the list item. So that's why we're using span as opposed to div. Let's now say delete button dot text content equals, let's say, a big X. And we'll say delete button dot class name equals delete button. And what else? You're going to say delete button dot on click. This will be a new function. A simple anonymous function will do, so we don't need to define a function name. We'll say list item dot remove. Okay. Let's do a semicolon to let the interpreter know that's the end of the line, even though it's not as finicky as C sharp sharp. Or sorry, C sharp and or C++. And let's do an append child. So this will append the delete button as a child to the list item, which will then give it access to the list item to run the remove function on. Okay. Now, is there anything else I need? Say, let's just do an else. And let's raise an alert. If, for whatever reason, we're not able to. So what is wrong with my syntax? I have, should be an if. What happened to my if? Oh, there it is. There's my if. So my if, oh, I need to move this curly bracket down. There we go. Now let's take a look at this. We got a big X here. It's really ugly. Let's see if we can maybe add some styling to it. So now we could say a delete button. Let's see. Just want to double check the name that I gave it. I gave it a class name of delete dash button. So I'm going to say delete dash button. Also, notice how I said class name for delete button and earlier for list container. Where is list container? I used ID. When you're referencing these with CSS, you use the hashtag to target an element by its ID, and you use a period to target an element by its class name. So you could do it either or, you could do it either way, and they both work. The advantage, well, I don't want to say advantage, actually. What you want to keep in mind when thinking about whether you want to use ID or class when targeting an item is, are these properties going to be shared, right? Like, let's say maybe you want to pass a property to multiple elements of the same ID, but not necessarily all the elements of the same class. Those are just things to keep in mind when you're writing out your HTML and CSS. Okay, so for our delete button, we want to be able to have a bit of extra space so it's not all crunched up like this. So let's say margin left, and let's give it a distance of 10 pixels. And let's say when you hover over it, instead of being this highlight text cursor, I want an actual selection cursor, a pointer. So I'm gonna save that. I'm gonna refresh. Entry 1, we're gonna add a new entry, and now we have some additional spacing, and when you hover over it, your cursor turns into a pointer, which makes it more apparent that it's something that you could interact with. Okay, but actually clicking on it isn't doing anything. I wonder why. Let's go back to our delete method and see if we're missing anything. So our delete button creates an element using span. I'm not using brackets by mistake like I was earlier. Next, we have text content, which we just assigned X. That looks good to me. We have delete button as the class name. On click, we're calling this anonymous function where we're basically removing the list item. And then we're appending the delete button as a child to the list item. Does create element need to be a button or something? Let's see, what line is that? Are we talking about 49, Tristan?
Line 42. I guess I'm just confused at what point you're specifying that it's a button. Or can you just add on click to anything?
Yeah, you could add on click to an element, anything really. So in this case, I did not create an actual button. We can talk about events a bit more, but on click is really just one of many, many, many events in that your browser can capture, right? And you could access these events through things like listeners, or you could do them directly by attaching them to an element. And in this case, we are just creating a very basic element. It's just a span element. So clicking anywhere within this span, we should be able to delete the entry. So the element we're creating is a span. Within that span, we have a text content of X. Think of span as like being this invisible container, right? That this X is inside of. And if we were to select this with our selector, we see that it is a span. It contains a class name of delete dash button. And oh, actually, let's also see if looks like nothing's happening when I click on it. It's not even being read as anything in the console. So I'm wondering if it's my syntax function. Let me see. What if I
Does tabbing or space matter on that second half?
what line?
So 42, the block, 42 down to 46. If it's in the,
Oh,
if, I don't know if how sensitive,
no, JavaScript's not like Python. It doesn't care about having an indentation. Oops. Okay. Let me do this. Let me do a console.log. I'm going to say test. So let's see if clicking on this is being read at all. So let's refresh, add another line item. Let's go to our console and let's start clicking. Okay, nothing is happening. Okay. Our delete button has a class name with delete dash button. We gave it a pointer cursor. Class name on click. Oh man. Okay. Do I have another on click in here? Yeah. Notice how in line 26 my on click is ONCLICK, but with lowercase c. I have a capital C here. So let's lowercase that c. Let's refresh this. And now it works. So be very intentional with your casing and your parentheses and brackets, because all of that stuff matters when you're working with HTML. So now we see that we are able to delete stuff. And the console log works as well. So that's our delete button. We now have a working to-do list, and we can delete items from the list. So let's just do one more thing, and let's play around with some of these third-party APIs. If you go back to today's lesson and the assignments, we could see that part of this is to access a list of free APIs and integrate it into our application. So I'm going to play with the dog API, which is a very simple third-party API. It utilizes this endpoint. When you fetch, it's going to return this JSON response, which includes a URL to a randomized dog image. So let's grab this right now. I'm going to copy this, and then paste it later. Let's go back to our script, and let's now add a new header. Let's say H2 again, and this is going to be my dog. Or yeah, that's fine. And now we're going to add another button. Let's say it's just going to have an ID of like dog API fetch button, and it's going to say fetch random dog image. All right, from here, let's add a breaker so we could have a separate line in between the header, or sorry, the button and the image. And we are now going to create an image with an ID called dog image. We're going to set a source to a blank string. And then we're going to say, we're going to give it an alt. And when you are working with an image, an alt is basically the text that will hover, or the text that will render when you hover over it with your cursor. So dog image. Image goes here. And now we are going to utilize another script. So we'll add a new function called fetch random dog image. And let's use our fetch request. Fetch is a very, very basic JavaScript built-in method for utilizing, for making a fetch request, a very simple RESTful fetch request. And here, what we got to do is pass in the URL that we've copied over, and then we could run some .thens. So .then will trigger once this fetch returns a response, and we want to manipulate that response using a simple lambda expression. So that response is the parameter we're passing in on the left, and the expression on the right is response.json. This will basically interpret the response as JSON, which we then will pass in as data. And we are going to say something like document.getElement by ID. What we're going to do is we're going to grab this image, which we gave an ID of dog image. We are going to use parentheses and not square brackets. And we're going to say source equals data dot message. Because if you remember, when we were in our dog API, it says we were getting a JSON response. And that JSON response contains the URL as a value to the message key. So we want to be able to access that data.message. So that's what we are going to then overwrite as the source. So that URL will become the new source. So with our .thens, we could use something called the .catch, which will raise an error if this request fails for whatever reason. So we'll just do a simple console.error that says error can't grab image or something along those lines. And then we just raise this as an error. It's the value, the second parameter that we pass into this error method. Let's close that. Let's see. We want to now add an event listener to this button. So let's get a document.getElement ID, or by ID, I should say. I'm going to target the whatever I called it. This has to be within the script. Whoops. I called it dog API fetch button. So we're going to grab that button. We're going to attach an event listener. And the event we want to listen for is a click. So remember earlier I said that on click is basically one of many, many, many events that you can listen for or attach directly to an element. So on click is one way of doing that. Adding an event listener for click is the other way of doing that. So we say add event listener. We're going to listen for a click. And then we're going to call the method fetch random dog image once we receive that click. So now let's save. Let's refresh. We see we have the new header, the new button, and the new image, which has nothing but an alternative text because the image is actually not pulling anything. So I'm going to hit this button, and we now have a random dog image. Hit it again. Should get another dog image. Any questions? Oh, so cute. Cool. So that is basically what today's challenge is. We are going to have you build your own little to-do list. So run through all of that if you haven't been already. And I think there are some things that I may not have done, like, yeah, the About Me page. It's basically, we created another file called about.html. You're going to want to do something like, I don't know, maybe at the very top of your page, create a span with different, let's say, paragraphs. We're going to say something like home, and about, and these could have different, actually, I don't want to use paragraphs. I want to use HTML reference, I think is what that stands for. So this basically allows me to turn whatever this is that I'm passing in, this text, into a URL that I'm passing in. So I'm going to say index.html. So clicking on home will just take me to index.html. And clicking on about will take me to about.html. I'm going to update this closing tag to be another A. Let's refresh. And now we have our links, which should take us, once we correct our URL, it should take us to the proper page. Cool. So about is blank, but that's for you to edit on your own. And that's today's challenge. Any questions? Cool. All right. We've all been here for about an hour, so take a 15-minute break, and breakout rooms are open for when you get back, and we will reconnect at 9 o'clock to walk through some of your examples.